Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Zvjezdana, and I will be talking about what microplastics are, how they enter our bodies, what science currently tells us about their potential health impacts, and what actions can be taken to reduce exposure and address this growing global challenge. Next slide, please. So here I wrote that water has shaped human civilization for thousands of years, sustaining life, enabling agriculture, powering economies, and connecting communities. By that, I just wanted to remind us that water has always been at the heart of human civilization, from the earliest settlements that emerge along rivers to modern cities and economies. Access to water has shaped how we live, how we grow food, how we develop communities and build societies. So it was not just a resource, it's still not just a resource, it is a foundation of life and of our development. Next slide. Of course, it is important to look at a bigger picture of how water is valued and protected, at least at the European level. Back in 2000, the European Union adopted the Water Framework Directive, which recognizes water not as a commodity, but as a shared heritage that must be protected. Its goal is for all surface waters to achieve good ecological status by 2027. That is in 1 year. So if it really was like this, I think we wouldn't have this project right now, since it's 2026. But it is what it is. And by this, they meant a healthy ecosystem and reduced pollution pressures. But when we look at the sources of pollution, it becomes clear that much of the problem originates on land. Only about 20% of plastic waste in the oceans comes from activities such as shipping, fishing, or tourism. Then we have the remaining 80% that comes from land-based sources and is carried to the sea by rivers, which in a way act as transport pathways for pollution. What is particularly concerning is that up to 75% of this waste consists of plastic from households and from industry, which shows us how closely the issue is linked to our everyday patterns of production and consumption. Next slide, please. Now we have this graph on the right. I hope you can see it. It shows how rapidly plastic production has grown over the past 20 years, because in more than half of all the plastic ever produced has been made in the last 26 years, which is particularly striking when we consider that modern plastics were first developed in the early 20th century. And it was initially popularized by the military industry. And after World War II, plastic production kind of surged, transforming plastic from a wartime material into a widely available consumer commodity. So you can see that global production increased from around 2 million tons per year in the middle of the 20th century. And that right now our projections are that they could reach 1.2 billion tons annually in about 30 years. Of course, this growth has been accompanied by a massive accumulation of waste. Today, an estimated 8 billion tons of plastic waste pollutes land, air, and oceans. Or actually water in general. Plastic has become embedded in, I think, nearly every aspect of modern life, but the environmental consequences are becoming increasingly visible and more difficult to manage. Next slide. When we are talking about microplastics, the term was coined literally 20 years ago in 2004. But in just 2 decades, it has become one of the probably most widely discussed environmental issue. What are microplastics? They are small plastic particles formed through the breakdown of larger plastic items in the environment. Because they're so small and persistent, they can travel easily through natural systems. Today, microplastics have been detected in water, soil, air, and throughout the food chain, which makes the exposure almost unavoidable. One of the fastest growing sources of this pollution is for sure the textile sector, which has like 35% of the primary microplastics entering the waters. But my colleague Vanya will talk about it in greater length after me. Next slide, please. How do they form? Well, they form in several ways. They can result from the breakdown of larger plastic items. As materials slowly fragment under the influence of sunlight, water, wind, and mechanical forces. They can also be generated through the everyday wear and tear of plastic products, such as textiles, tires, and packaging. And in addition, some microplastics are produced directly in small particle form, and they are intentionally added to products for specific industrial or commercial uses. I guess most of you know about, body scrubs, because all those little beads in them, they are basically microplastics that are intentionally added, and they are like scrubbing your first layers of skin. So next slide. What is the issue with microplastics? Because they are so tiny, they are smaller than 5 millimeters, they are highly persistent and they remain in the environment for a long, long time, and they are easily spread through ecosystems. So this is not only an environmental issue, but it is also a growing concern uh, for human health in the first place, of course. The durability of plastic is it's like a problem because it does not naturally disappear. Most of the plastic that is ever produced still exists in one way in or another in some kind of form, except those that are incinerated, which is a pollution in its own form, and it's a topic in its own right. Uh, but today, microplastics have been found in more than 1,300 species, and even within the human body, which is highlighting how widespread the contamination has become. Next slide. When we are talking about microplastics and health, there's a certain amount of growing public concern about the health effects of microplastics, especially as they are increasingly detected in everyday food and drinks such as tea bags, seafood, meat, and bottled water. Scientists estimate that on average we are ingesting about one credit card per week. I think that is like the latest information from a couple of months ago. And I think we were all pretty shocked when we saw that one, because can you imagine like ingesting one credit card per week? At the same time, it is important to note that the scientific evidence is still developing, because there is relatively few studies that are directly examining this problem, or at least the long-term effects on human health. Which means that we are still kind of working to fully understand the level of the risk they may pose. Next slide. How are we exposed to microplastics? Well, in everyday life, we are exposed in several different ways. We can inhale some small parts that come from our household dust, our furniture, or carpets. There is also potential exposure through the skin, for example, through certain cosmetic products or through textiles. Ingestion is also another pathway through products such as toothpaste, for example, as well as through drinking from plastic bottles or eating from plastic food containers. Uh, Also, it happens through food because heating food in plastic containers can increase the release of microplastic particles. Uh, and microplastics can also enter through the food chain much earlier at the agricultural level. As I said, the microplastics have been detected in the soil, in the crops, and in the livestock, which means they can eventually make their way into our organism through the food we ingest. Next slide. I will talk a bit about the aquatic system because it is also, in a way, part of our food system, whether we like it or not. Uh, Microplastics are now widely present in rivers and seas. We had this great presentation of our colleagues before my presentation, so thank you for that. It was really informative and helpful. Uh, Microplastics are usually found in fish and shellfish, and even in the deep sea organism, showing how deeply they have penetrated that marine environments. Uh, and not only they are found in the waters, I mean, I think they also find the microplastic particles to the summits of Mount Everest. But back to our common water topic. Uh, Research also suggests that exposure to microplastics can have biological effects on animals. So it is also important to talk about health from that perspective. Studies for now indicate that fish and birds may become more vulnerable to infections. While laboratory and cellular research has linked microplastics to inflammation, to weakened immune responses, tissue damage, altered metabolic functions, and even abnormal organ developments. Next slide. Which is not peculiar, since most plastic waste that enters the ocean does not remain visible on the surface. Around 70% of disposed waste from households or from the industry sinks to the seabed, while about 15% ends up on coastlines. So only a small share remains floating, that we can see it in a way. This means that the large floating plastic patches we often hear about are only the small visible part of a much larger, mostly hidden problem. Next slide. About plastic degradation, well, plastic waste, regardless of its size, poses a serious threat to the underwater life. I mentioned a few of the consequences of that. Both microplastics and larger plastic debris can lead to entanglement as well as a visual and acoustic disturbance in the environment. And many organisms also ingest plastic particles, which can result in injury, in suffocation, or starvation. Beyond direct harm to wildlife, plastic pollution also changes aquatic and coastal conditions. It can disrupt habitats. It can even facilitate the spread of invasive species across different water systems, which I think we can see in the Mediterranean, which is further just affecting the ecosystem balance. Next slide. Now, how is that affecting us all? I mean, I mentioned the food chain. Uh, because plastic particles can attract and carry all those harmful chemicals on the surface when the organisms ingest them. These substances can accumulate in their tissues and they move up through the food chain and they eventually reach us. which of course raises a number of public health concerns, as pollution in water doesn't just stay isolated, it spreads through the ecosystem. Next slide. So how it is affecting us? Scientists are still trying to understand how does it all happen. At this stage, we don't know how long they remain in the body or how different factors such as genetics, environment, or type of exposure might influence this effect. There is also still no clear evidence showing whether certain types of plastics or exposure pathways are more harmful than others. Research in this field is further complicated by, of course, methodological challenges. Many studies also struggle to reflect real world conditions since plastic particles vary widely in size or in shape or in their composition. Another key issue is chemical complexity because more than 10,000 chemicals are used in plastics, and most have not been fully assessed for safety. Over 2,400 are considered potentially toxic, including substances such as phthalates, bisphenols, PFAS, which are often called as forever chemicals. And of course, there are flame retardants. On top of all this, even conducting research can be really challenging because plastic contamination is so widespread that it can even be introduced during laboratory work itself. Next slide. Smaller particles of microplastic may pose a greater risk because they can travel further into our tissues and are more easily absorbed by the body. Exposure has been associated with a range of potential health risks, including cardiovascular diseases, inflammation, hormonal disruption, stroke, heart attack, and even premature death in some cases. A large-scale review by researchers at I think it was University of California in San Francisco, also suggests that microplastic exposure may affect reproductive, digestive, and respiratory health. And also, it points to possible links with colon and lung conditions. Next slide. Once the microplastics enter the bloodstream, they can circulate throughout the entire body and they can accumulate easily in different tissues and organs. By now, they have been detected in the brain, heart, liver, spleen, intestines, and reproductive organs. They have also been found in the placenta, meaning that we are in a way born pre-polluted, I guess, by now. It was also found in amniotic fluid and even in a newborn's stool. And of course, I didn't mention the skin, the hair, the saliva, mucus, and even the semen. Next slide, please. When we are talking about the impact of microplastics on the heart and blood vessels, it is also, I mentioned, easy for them to just accumulate there. And they have been detected in the arterial plaques, which is particularly concerning because it suggests they may be involved in processes that affect vascular health. Current research indicates that microplastic exposure may be associated with an increased risk of heart attack, of thrombosis, and one of the proposed mechanisms of how that's happening is chronic inflammation. Apparently, the same thing they saw while examining different types of birds and fish, which is a known driver of many cardiovascular diseases. Next slide. So, are we really helpless against the microplastics? It can seem a bit overwhelming. but there are different sets of measure that maybe we can take to just make it a bit easier for us. Uh, when it comes to reducing exposure to microplastics in our everyday life, kitchen is always a good place to start with the cleaning. It's recommended to use glass, to use ceramic, or to use metal containers. To never heat the food in those plastic ones because that's basically a disaster to do because the heat can release those small particles from the plastics, so it's better to just avoid microwaving food in them. And of course, to be cautious with those reused or worn out plastic items or those or those coated, pans. So the food won't stick on them because once you scrub that off, it can release the microplastics in your food. It is also advisable to reduce the use of plastic bottles and packaging and instead opt for glass or for some metal alternatives. Simple changes like just replacing the plastic utensils with wooden or with metal ones. And just being mindful of all those little details can greatly help to reduce the exposure. In terms of clothing, choosing natural materials such as cotton, wool, or linen can make a huge difference. Since synthetic fibers like polyester and nylon are known to release microfibers, washing clothes less frequently can also help reduce the amount of microplastics because it is known that they are just releasing it through our waterways. Next slide. Another way to reduce exposure is through personal hygiene and cosmetics. That some of those I mentioned on the beginning of my presentation, but I will just go through it now. It is recommended to choose products not only that are free from microplastics, but that don't come in those huge, plastic packaging. Where it's possible, it is also helpful to just, avoid those, to maybe use refills if you have them in your cities or in your countries, to use solid soaps and shampoos. They're becoming pretty popular in the past couple of years. And just, to while you're buying something, to buy it consciously, to maybe educate yourself better about ingredients or at least about the packaging. When we are talking about shopping habits also can play an important role. Using reusable cloth bags instead of single-use plastic ones is simple, but it is always effective. Choosing products with minimal packaging or buying in bulk and in refill systems. And of course, avoiding single-use plastics altogether, whatever you buy. It's a small steps, but it takes you a long way. And of course, in the end of the day, we should never undermine the importance of just like living a healthy lifestyle, including adequate sleep, a balanced diet, and just keeping your overall immune system on a specific level. So even if you come in contact with different types of, I don't know, not only microplastics, but there are other harmful stuff in pretty much everything we ingest today, you always have your immune system as a first line of defense against those. Next slide. Of course, we can't do everything on our own. It's not always about our, preferable choice in everyday life. So luckily, we have some regulatory momentum around microplastics, and the European Union is leading the charge for sure. I would just want to emphasize this one. It was pretty interesting for me while I was searching. Uh, and that is this REACH regulation, which includes restrictions on intentionally added microplastics, for example, scrubs that I mentioned, in a wide range of products, which is gradually phasing them out across sectors such as cosmetics, detergents, and other consumer goods. Uh, Beyond pollution control, the EU is also addressing the problem at the source with eco-design and eco-labeling regulations, which just encourage more of a sustainable product design, greater transparency about materials, and reduced environmental impact across a product's full life cycle. Which you can see these measures reflect kind of a shift towards a more preventive approach. Next slide. Thank you. And just to conclude in a way, of course, current regulatory efforts, they're always welcome. They're important first step, but they are still not sufficient to kind of respond to this problem on a more broader level, on a global level of plastic production, which already exceeds hundreds of millions of tons annually, and they just continue to grow in a way. From a policy perspective, while I was searching, I saw that many experts argue that we need just like a stronger systemic action, including limits on overall plastic production, a clear phase out of unnecessary single use plastics, and the elimination of toxic chemicals used in plastic manufacturing. There is also increasing support for developing safer non-plastic alternatives. We know they are a bit more expensive, especially when you are looking from the perspective of all those industries. But of course, there's always our side, the side of consumers, who, of course, we have our fair share in that. We can always, as they say popularly, vote with our pocket. You always know just what to pay attention to, what to choose, where to redirect your money to. And I'm sure if we were all like coordinate a bit more, that the big industries would for sure see it as some kind of sign, red flag, green flag. I think that's an undervalued system that we should maybe practice more. Next slide. Um, of course, I said some of this. It's not a problem that can be fixed by a single actor. We are apparently all together in this one. So effective change will require from us an action from governments, from corporations, from international cooperation, and of course from our side, from the consumer side, and from other professional sectors that can drive the demand for safer materials and alternatives. Next slide. Well, thank you, and that's about it from my side. If you have any questions, I would be happy to discuss.